Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
When I first met my husband 12 years ago, I never imagined I'd be in this situation. We were both working at a children's hospital, him in pediatrics, me in occupational therapy. Our shared passion for helping children made our connection instant and deep. His mother, a retired nurse, seemed pleased with our relationship at first, but everything changed when our son was born. Our beautiful boy came into this world 5 years ago with a rare genetic condition affecting his sight. As medical professionals, my husband and I approached it practically, determined to give him the best life possible. We adapted our home, learned everything we could about his condition, and most importantly, decided to raise him with complete openness about his disability. We wanted him to grow up confident, understanding that being sight-impaired was just one part of who he was, not something to be ashamed of. My mother-in-law, however, had different ideas. Despite her nursing background, or maybe because of it, she treated our son's condition like some terrible tragedy. She would constantly send us articles about experimental treatments and miracle cures, refusing to accept that this was simply part of who he was. The incident that broke the camel's back happened last week. We decided to take her out for lunch at this new family restaurant downtown. Everything was going fine until my son mentioned his eyes were bothering him. I asked him gently if his eyes were feeling sensitive to the light today. He replied that they were feeling a bit ouchy. I suggested we could move to a table further from the window if he wanted. My mother-in-law immediately turned to my husband, completely ignoring our son's presence. She asked if we'd had him checked for light sensitivity, warning there might be something wrong. She started mentioning some new treatment she'd read about in Switzerland. I interrupted her, pointing out that we were actually discussing this with our son right now and that he could tell us exactly what he was feeling. Our son joined in, explaining in his sweet way that the light makes his eyes dance sometimes. That's when it happened. As my son's eyes had their natural, involuntary movements adjusting to the lighting, my mother-in-law gasped dramatically and grabbed my husband's arm. She demanded to know why he was doing that with his eyes. Her voice filled with panic, as if he was having some kind of medical emergency. The restaurant went quiet. Several people turned to look at us. I saw my son shrink in his chair, his little hands moving to cover his eyes. That was it. 5 years of her behavior, and this was the moment I'd had enough. I told her that he wasn't an it or a he when he was sitting right here. I reminded her that he was her grandson and could hear her. I explained that his eyes move sometimes because that's how they work, and if she had questions about his medical condition, she could ask them privately instead of announcing them to the entire restaurant. She tried to defend herself, claiming she was just concerned and bringing up her nursing background. I cut her off, telling her that as a nurse, she should know better than to treat a child like a medical curiosity, and as a grandmother, she should know better than to make her grandson feel like there's something wrong with him. I turned to my son and asked cheerfully if he'd like to go get ice cream instead, suggesting that this restaurant was a bit too bright. His face lit up as he eagerly agreed, asking if he could get chocolate. My husband stood up with us, telling his mother they would talk about this later and that her behavior today was completely unacceptable. When we walked out, I heard her trying to explain herself to nearby tables, repeatedly mentioning she was just trying to help and emphasizing her nursing background. Later that evening, my husband had a long phone conversation with her. He told her that until she could treat our son with respect and dignity, we wouldn't be seeing her. She tried to argue that she was just showing concern, that we were being too sensitive, but my husband stood his ground. 2 days later, she showed up at our house unannounced, clutching more printouts about experimental treatments. My husband met her at the door. She protested loudly that we couldn't keep her grandson from her, insisting she was just trying to help. My husband explained that either she needed to accept him as he is and treat him with respect, or she wouldn't see him at all. He emphasized that this wasn't about her or her medical knowledge, but about a 5-year-old boy who deserves to feel comfortable and accepted by his own grandmother. When she tried to bring up treatments again, I stepped in. I told her that neither the treatments nor she were welcome here until she could see her grandson as a person first, not a condition to be fixed. She left in tears, but for once, I didn't feel guilty. That evening, as I tucked our son into bed, he asked me something that confirmed we'd made the right decision. He wanted to know why his grandmother didn't like his dancing eyes. I explained to him gently that some people don't understand that different isn't bad, and that his eyes were perfect just the way they are. His response warmed my heart. He told me he liked them because they helped him see the world in his own special way. We haven't heard from my mother-in-law since then, and honestly, the peace in our house is palpable. My husband and I have agreed that, until she can truly accept our son for who he is, this distance is necessary. I work as a delivery driver for a local restaurant, and yesterday was probably the most intense day I've had on the job. I've been doing this for about 3 years now, and I've seen my fair share of crazy drivers, but nothing like this. I was making my usual Saturday afternoon deliveries downtown. The weather was nice, so there were lots of people out walking, enjoying their weekend. I had just finished dropping off an order and was heading back to the restaurant when I heard the distinct sound of tires screeching. At first I thought someone was just being a jerk at a stoplight, but then I saw this bright red sports car zigzagging through traffic like it was in some kind of racing movie. The driver was deliberately making his car drift from side to side, forcing other cars to slam on their brakes. People on the sidewalks were jumping back, and some had to dive into shop doorways to avoid getting hit. I pulled over to call the police, and that's when I heard people screaming. The guy in the sports car was now doing donuts in the middle of the intersection. A group of tourists had to run into a coffee shop to avoid getting hit. An old lady who was crossing the street with her walker nearly got clipped. Thankfully, a couple of teenagers helped her get to safety. They were all yelling at the driver. The old lady was shouting that he could have killed someone, while the driver just mockingly told her to learn to move faster, claiming this was how real driving was done. One of the teenagers tried to reason with him, telling him he was insane and needed to stop before someone got hurt. The driver just brushed them off, saying they should mind their own business and that he was just enjoying his new car. I could see other drivers calling the police too, but this guy was just getting more aggressive. He started doing these wide drifts, getting way too close to the buildings. People were recording everything on their phones. That's when karma finally kicked in. He tried to do this really wide drift, but he completely lost control. His car spun out and slammed right into a streetlight pole. The impact was so hard that the whole pole started swaying. Everyone around just froze, watching as the pole creaked and groaned. Then, in what felt like slow motion, it came crashing down right on top of his sports car, crushing the roof. The crowd that had gathered erupted in cheers. Some people were actually clapping. I know it sounds mean, but after seeing how many people he almost hurt, it felt like justice. Emergency medical technicians arrived within minutes. When they pulled the driver out on a stretcher, he was still trying to act tough. He was ranting about how expensive his car was and demanding that someone pay for the damage. He kept insisting that it was everyone else's fault for not getting out of his way. The emergency medical technician tried to get him to stay still, warning him about a possible concussion, but he wouldn't listen. He just kept going on about his limited edition model and how he wanted everyone's insurance information. A police officer had to step in and inform him that they had dozens of witnesses and multiple videos showing him deliberately endangering people's lives. The officer told him he was facing serious charges once he was cleared by the hospital. The guy kept ranting as they loaded him into the ambulance, threatening to sue everyone from the city to the light pole manufacturer. Turns out he had just bought the car that morning and wanted to show it off. Well, he definitely made an impression, just not the one he was hoping for. The police took statements from everyone, and I heard later that they found empty beer cans in what was left of his car. Between the reckless driving, property damage, and driving under the influence charges, plus all the civil lawsuits from people he almost hit, I doubt he'll be doing any more real driving for a very long time. The old lady he nearly hit actually stuck around to give her statement to the police, and she made everyone laugh when she commented that while she might be slow with her walker, at least she knew how to drive without hitting things. I was 2 hours late finishing my deliveries that day, but my boss was pretty understanding when I showed him the video. It's now been shared all over our local social media, and people are calling it instant karma at its finest. 3 months ago, I discovered a lump during my routine self-examination. Being in my early 30s with no family history of breast cancer, I initially tried to convince myself it was nothing serious. However, after a week of constant worry, I scheduled an appointment with my doctor. What followed was a whirlwind of mammograms, ultrasounds, and finally a biopsy that confirmed my worst fears. The initial surgery was scheduled quickly, but the waiting game that followed was excruciating. 50 days of complete silence. Every time I called the hospital for information about my biopsy results, the receptionists would always say the same thing, that they didn't have any information yet because the multidisciplinary team hadn't met to discuss my case. Making matters worse, due to COVID restrictions, I had to attend all appointments alone. No family support, no hand to hold. Just me and my thoughts. Finally, I got called in for a checkup with my surgeon. When I entered his office, I couldn't help but make a lighthearted comment about how long they'd taken with the results. The surgeon responded by saying he'd explain everything in a minute after he grabbed my files. He left me with a nurse while I prepared for the examination. As I lay there on the bed, my mind was racing with possibilities, both good and bad. That's when the nurse, who was shuffling through my papers, casually mentioned that I had an appointment with the anesthesiologist at 11:30 upstairs. My heart nearly stopped. When I asked if this meant I needed a new surgery, the nurse's face immediately changed as she realized her mistake. She started backpedaling frantically, trying to downplay what she'd said by telling me that might not be the reason and that the doctor would explain everything. Those next few minutes were pure torture. My mind went to the darkest places, imagining every possible worst-case scenario. When the surgeon finally returned, he started the checkup, carefully choosing his words. I couldn't take it anymore and asked him directly if this was about needing another surgery. He froze mid-examination. When I explained that the nurse had mentioned the anesthesiologist appointment, I watched as his face turned red, but he quickly composed himself. He went on to explain that the surgery hadn't achieved clean borders, and after lengthy discussions with the chemotherapy and radiotherapy teams, they had decided on a second surgery. They had waited to inform me until they had secured an operating slot. To everyone's surprise, I broke into a smile and asked if this meant my lymph nodes weren't affected, and if I could keep them. The surgeon looked at me like I had grown a second head, telling me he'd never had a patient take news of a second surgery quite this well. After my examination, as I was leaving for my unexpected appointment with the anesthesiologist, I could hear the surgeon raising his voice behind the closed door. He was asking the nurse if she realized what she'd done and reminding her about their protocols for delivering sensitive information. His voice faded as I walked away, but I couldn't help feeling a bit satisfied. The nurse's face had turned ghost white, and I knew she'd remember this lesson for a long time. She was transferred to the administrative department, where she wouldn't have direct contact with patients anymore. Living with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, POTS, since I was 14 has been challenging. The condition makes my heart rate spike whenever I stand up, causing dizziness and fatigue. Combined with permanent nerve damage in my legs from a car accident 2 years ago, simple tasks like grocery shopping become a real struggle. My right leg tends to buckle and bow inward, making walking for extended periods painful and dangerous. I've learned to adapt, though. My dad has been my rock through it all, helping me navigate daily life while encouraging my independence. We have a system worked out for grocery shopping. He assists with reaching items and carrying heavy stuff, while I use mobility carts when available to maintain some autonomy. This day started like any other shopping trip. We needed to stock up on groceries, so Dad drove us to Walmart. As we walked in, I noticed 3 mobility carts lined up by the wall, a sight that always brings relief. Dad mentioned he needed to use the bathroom first, so I settled into one of the carts near the entrance to wait for him. While I waited, an employee approached me and asked if I was waiting for someone. I told her that my dad was in the bathroom. I didn't think much of her question at the time. I should have noticed her suspicious tone, but I was busy checking our shopping list on my phone. Dad returned shortly after, and we started making our way into the store. That's when things went sideways. The employee suddenly yelled across the store that the cart was for handicapped people only. Her sudden yell startled me so badly, I nearly dropped my phone. Stuttering from the shock, I told her that I knew it was for handicapped people and that I was handicapped myself. She shot back that she had seen me walk into the store and insisted I could walk around just fine. My heart was racing, and not just from my parts. I hate confrontation, but I've had to learn to stand up for myself. I told her that the details of my disabilities were none of her business, but I could assure her I was disabled. What happened next still makes my blood boil. This woman, this complete stranger, walked over, switched off the cart, and actually tried to physically pull me out of it. Thank God my dad was there. My dad immediately stepped between us, demanding to know what she thought she was doing. He angrily asked if she was going to interrogate everyone who used these carts about their health. The employee's face turned red as she insisted that I was too young to be disabled and accused me of just being lazy. The commotion attracted security, who came over to investigate. We explained what happened, and surprisingly, the employee didn't try to lie about it. She admitted to everything she'd done, probably thinking she was in the right. The security guard asked if I had proof of my disability. I didn't want to, but I stood up, letting them see how my legs buckled and my right leg bowed inward. The security guard immediately understood. The employee demanded to know why I hadn't just shown them this in the first place. I coldly told her that I didn't need to prove anything to a random stranger with no authority. She mumbled something under her breath and skulked away. But I wasn't done. After our shopping, I called corporate and filed a detailed complaint. Then I went a step further and filed a police report for assault, since she had tried to physically remove me from the cart. 2 days later, I received calls from both corporate and the store manager. They told me the employee had been terminated and would be barred from working at any of their locations. The police also took my case seriously once they reviewed the store security footage, and she is now facing charges for assault. I may look young and my disabilities might be invisible at first look, but that doesn't make them any less real. That employee learned the hard way that you can't judge someone's disabilities by their appearance or their age. I've been involved with charity work most of my adult life, but there's one event that's particularly close to my heart, an annual charity walk that I've been volunteering with for over 20 years now. It started when my mother was diagnosed with a condition this charity supports. She passed away 3 years after her diagnosis, but I kept volunteering. It was my way of honoring her memory and helping others facing the same struggles. Over the years, I've become something of an expert on running this event. The charity staff often come to me for advice, and I know every detail of the operation inside and out. From handling permits to coordinating with local authorities, I've done it all. What started as a modest event with a few hundred participants has grown to sometimes accommodate over 2,500 people. When COVID hit, we had to cancel the walk for 2 years straight. It was heartbreaking but necessary. When we finally got to restart, the energy was incredible. People were so excited to be back, supporting the cause, and being part of the community again. Everything was running smoothly until about halfway through the event. I was at my usual post near the entrance to the parking lot where we start the walk. We had it blocked off as usual. It's at the end of a dead-end street in the city park, and we need to keep cars out for the safety of our participants. We had all the proper permits, just like we'd had for the past 2 decades. That's when I spotted him, a man on his bicycle with his young son, probably around 10 years old, trailing behind him. He had that look on his face that every event organizer dreads, the look of someone who's about to make their problem everyone else's problem. He demanded to speak to whoever was in charge. I explained that the event coordinator was busy giving an interview to the local news and asked if I could help instead. He complained about wanting to park in the lot and insisted that we couldn't block the road. I looked around at the hundreds of people walking around the parking lot, many with small children, some elderly, others in wheelchairs. I explained that we had permits for the event and needed to protect our participants. I also pointed out that there wouldn't be anywhere to park even if we let him in. He argued back, claiming we absolutely couldn't block access and that we were preventing people from using the park. I told him that we'd been doing this event for decades and had every right to secure the area for our participants. He kept insisting that what we were doing was illegal and that he should be allowed to park there. I tried explaining the situation again, emphasizing that we had the proper permits and were following all city regulations. His face started turning red, and I could see him getting more agitated. Then came the threat I'd heard so many times before. He asked if I wanted him to call the police. In my earlier years, this kind of threat might have made me nervous. But after 2 decades of handling all sorts of situations at this event, I'd learned to recognize this for what it was, a last-ditch attempt to get his way through intimidation. I took a moment to compose my thoughts, then smiled and told him that, yes, I actually did want him to call the police. I went on to mention that if he'd arrived an hour earlier, he could have spoken directly with Officer Thompson, who had been helping us manage traffic here for the past 5 years. I added that while the officer was currently on his lunch break, his colleagues would be happy to come explain our permits. The man's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, embarrassment, and finally defeat. Without another word, he turned his bicycle around and pedaled away, his confused son following behind. I watched them leave, feeling a mix of satisfaction and pity. Satisfaction at standing my ground, but pity for his son who was learning all the wrong lessons from his father's behavior. When they disappeared around the corner, I could hear the upbeat music from our event DJ and the chatter of happy participants continuing their walk, completely unaware of the small drama that had just played out. I turned back to my duties, making a mental note to add this to my collection of stories about entitled people trying to disrupt our event. At least this one had a satisfying ending. I've been working at this family diner for almost 8 years now. Started as a busboy when I was 16, worked my way up to server, and now I'm the assistant manager. What happened last Tuesday, though, that's definitely going down as one of the craziest shifts I've ever worked. It was around 6 p.m., right in the middle of our dinner rush. The diner was packed and we were short-staffed because one of our servers had called in sick. I was helping out on the floor, taking orders and running food, while also trying to handle my management duties. That's when she walked in, a woman I'd later hear the police officers refer to as Karen. She had this vibe about her, you know, the kind that makes service workers collectively hold their breath. She was dressed like she was going to a fancy restaurant, not our humble diner, and she had this look on her face like she'd just smelled something bad. She sat herself down at a booth meant for 4 people, even though she was just with her kid, who looked around 10 years old. I was handling that section, so I headed over with menus. Before I could even finish my greeting, she cut me off and demanded to speak to the manager. When I explained that I was the assistant manager, she immediately started talking about some single mother discount she'd heard about. I stood there confused, telling her we've never had such a discount in the 8 years I've worked here. She insisted that her friend had told her about it, claiming that single mothers eat free with their children. When I tried to explain again that we had no such promotion, though I could tell her about our weekly specials, she got even more aggressive. She accused me of calling her friend a liar and demanded to speak to the actual manager. I had to explain again that I was the manager on duty and reiterate that we've never had a single mother discount. That's when things really escalated. Her face turned red, and she slammed her hand on the table, making several nearby customers jump. She started shouting about discrimination against single mothers, demanding to see the owner. I tried to calm her down, explaining that the owner wasn't present and asking her to lower her voice as she was disturbing other customers. She became even more belligerent, refusing to leave until she got her free meal. She went on about the hardships of being a single mother and insisted her friend had eaten there for free the previous week. Her poor kid was sinking into the booth, clearly mortified, while other customers had stopped eating to watch the scene unfold. I gave her two clear options: either order from our menu and pay like everyone else, or leave. I warned her that if she continued to disturb our customers, I'd have to call the police. She practically dared me to do it, saying she'd tell them about our discrimination against single mothers. So I did. I went to the back office and called the police. While waiting, she got up and started going from table to table, telling other customers about how we were discriminating against her. Some tried to ignore her, others told her to sit down and be quiet. When two police officers arrived, one male and one female, I explained the situation to them and they approached her. The male officer told her she needed to leave the premises, but she refused, still yelling about discrimination. The female officer tried explaining that the restaurant had the right to refuse service and warned her about being arrested for trespassing if she didn't leave. She responded by yelling about knowing her rights. Then it got weird. She suddenly reached for the female officer's radio on her shoulder. Nobody knows what she was thinking. Maybe she wanted to call for backup against the backup. But the moment her fingers touched the radio, the female officer reacted. It happened so fast. The officer grabbed Karen's arm and in one smooth motion executed this perfect judo throw. Karen went flying and landed hard on the diner floor with a thud that made everyone wince. She immediately started screaming about police brutality and claiming she couldn't feel her back. They had to call an ambulance, but she didn't go quietly. Even while being strapped to the stretcher, she was yelling about lawsuits and discrimination. The officers put her in handcuffs before letting the paramedics load her into the ambulance. Her kid wasn't even hers. It was her nephew, and she was supposed to be babysitting him while his actual mom, her sister, was at work. When the sister arrived at the police station later, she was furious. She ended up getting charged with attempted assault on a police officer, disturbing the peace, and violating her probation. She's serving 6 months in county jail. Her sister got full custody of the nephew and filed a restraining order against her. The female officer still comes by the diner sometimes. She always orders the same thing: our house special burger with extra pickles. Whenever I serve her, we share a knowing look and try not to laugh about the infamous single mother discount incident. When I was fresh out of university working my first real job while trying to complete my master's degree, I had 2 roommates and 2 cats, and we were desperately searching for a place after being forced out of our previous rental due to harassment from neighbors. The house we found seemed decent enough at first glance. The landlady showed us around, pointing out all the charming features of the old property. What she didn't mention were the leaks, the mold, and the bugs that would become our unwanted roommates. When I first confronted her about the issues, I told her about the bathroom ceiling leaking into the dining room every time someone showered. She just brushed it off, telling me it was nothing to worry about and suggesting we just put a bucket under it. When I mentioned the mold growing behind the furniture, her solution was to spray some bleach around haphazardly and declare it fixed. She left that day and basically ghosted us. Every call and text went unanswered. I decided to take action and contacted the local housing authorities. The inspector was shocked when he came. He asked me how long the place had been in such a state, and I explained that it had been months and that the landlady wouldn't respond to our complaints. He immediately served her with an improvement notice. She ignored it. They fined her. She ignored that too. This went on for months until I discovered something interesting. She wasn't even legally registered as a landlady. When I confronted her about this, she acted completely clueless, asking what I meant about needing to be registered just because she inherited the house from her parents. I explained that it was the law and she couldn't rent out properties without proper registration. She tried claiming she couldn't afford to fix anything right now. I offered to buy the house from her at a discount so I could fix it myself. Her response? She said she'd think about it, but right now she was off to the Canary Islands for 6 weeks. The situation got worse during the pandemic, The boiler died completely, leaving us without heat or hot water. I had to shower at work and friends' houses for months. When she finally got it fixed, it was only because the authorities threatened her with massive fines. Then came her pathetic attempt at eviction. She downloaded the form from some random legal website and didn't even fill it out properly. I left when I received it. When I pointed out that she couldn't evict me since she wasn't even a registered landlady and hadn't paid her fines, she tried arguing that it was her house and she could do what she wanted. I had to explain to her that's not how the law works. Years passed, and the house kept deteriorating. The ceiling started leaking in 5 different places. My roommates eventually moved out, but I stayed out of principle. I wasn't going to let her win. Finally, in 2024, the ceiling partially collapsed. The housing inspector came back and declared the house unfit for human habitation. They gave her 4 weeks to fix everything or face daily fines. The inspector explained that she would be fined £20 for every day someone lived there past the deadline. I asked for clarification, realizing this meant she'd be paying the same amount in fines as the rent I hadn't had to pay for the past 5 years. The inspector confirmed this with a knowing smile. I found my dream house with my boyfriend and moved out in January 2025. The day we got our new keys, I received a letter about my old rental. The mortgage company was suing the landlady for repossession due to non-payment. Turns out she had mortgaged the inherited house and couldn't make payments because I legally stopped paying rent years ago. She lost the house, racked up about £20,000 in fines, and destroyed her own reputation as a landlady, all because she wouldn't fix a few leaks and some mold at the start. She can't even rent out properties anymore because she's been blacklisted by the housing authorities. My aunt, my mother's younger sister for as long as I can remember, she's been the center of attention at every family gathering. When she bothers to show up, that is. I'm getting married tomorrow, and I should be feeling excited and happy. Instead, I'm sitting here at 2 a.m. trying to process the drama that just unfolded. Let me give you some context. My aunt has a reputation in our family. She's the queen of last-minute cancellations, birthday parties, Christmas dinners, family reunions. You name it, she's backed out of it. Her excuses are always elaborate and dramatic. Last Christmas, she claimed she saw a black cat cross her path on the way to her car, and she couldn't possibly risk the bad luck of traveling that day. The year before that, she insisted she had developed a sudden allergy to turkey on Thanksgiving Day. Despite all this, I still wanted her at my wedding. She's family after all, and somewhere deep down I hoped this would be different. When we first told her about the engagement, she seemed genuinely excited. She even showed me the expensive dress she bought specifically for the occasion. For months, she's been asking about every detail, the venue, the decorations, the menu. She even convinced me to invite her 2 sons, even though we're having a small wedding and I barely know them. Everything seemed fine until yesterday. That's when the messages started. My aunt messaged me asking if her mother could attend the wedding. I replied that of course she could, but explained I would need to check with the venue about wheelchair access and accommodating her nurse. I spent the next few hours frantically calling the venue, trying to reorganize seating arrangements and adjusting the catering order. My grandmother is 92 and very fragile. We needed to make sure everything would be perfect for her. Then my aunt sent another message telling me to forget she asked, saying it was rude of her to make such a request so close to the date. I tried calling her. No answer. I sent messages. Nothing but silence. Then, 12 hours later, she posted in the group chat with all the wedding guests, announcing that she wouldn't be able to attend the wedding and sending her love to the happy couple. Not a word to me directly. When I finally got hold of her, the conversation turned bizarre. She went on a long rant about how deeply offended she was that I made her beg for her mother to attend. She reminded me that she had told me countless times about her mother's fragile condition and how difficult it was for her to be outside. She claimed she still loved me but said I was very rude and closed-minded. Then she declared that I didn't deserve her presence at my wedding and topped it off by saying I wasn't that young anymore. I responded by pointing out that I never made her beg and had immediately said yes, spending hours trying to accommodate them. I told her how hurtful her actions were. She dismissed my response, saying I was too closed-minded to understand, and that she wouldn't subject herself to this treatment. I was about to let it go, but then my mother showed me something interesting. Apparently, my aunt had booked a spa day months ago for the same day as my wedding, the same spa where my cousin works. She never planned to come. She just wanted to create drama and make my wedding about her. So I did something I've never done before. I took screenshots of the spa booking confirmation my cousin sent and posted them in the family group chat, along with all my aunt's previous messages about how excited she was for the wedding. I added a simple message telling her that if the spa was more important than her niece's wedding, she should have just said no to the invitation instead of creating drama, and wished her an enjoyable massage. The group chat exploded. She left the group chat, but I heard from my mother that she's furious because now everyone knows about her spa appointment. Tomorrow, I'm getting married to the love of my life, surrounded by people who genuinely want to be there. And for the first time, I don't feel guilty about my aunt's absence. I feel relieved. I've been working at this construction company in Arizona for about 3 years now. It's not the best job, but it pays the bills, and I'm good at what I do. I'm one of the few workers who actually shows up on time every day and takes pride in their work. My boss, he's this guy who inherited the company from his dad and thinks he knows everything about construction, despite spending most of his time golfing or on vacation. Last week, we were working on this big renovation project. The client wanted their warehouse completely redone, and we were already behind schedule because my boss kept cutting corners on safety equipment to save money. I had brought this up several times, but he always brushed it off, saying I was being too cautious. Well, guess what happened? While I was moving some heavy materials without proper lifting equipment because my boss refused to rent it, I felt this sharp pain shoot through my lower back. It was like someone had stuck a hot knife right into my spine. I tried to walk it off, but after an hour I could barely move. My supervisor saw me struggling and suggested I go to the walk-in clinic. He helped me fill out the initial incident report, and I headed to the nearest clinic that accepted workers' compensation cases. I was sitting in the waiting room filling out paperwork when my phone started ringing. My boss called, asking if I was at the clinic. When I confirmed, he immediately started talking about money. He warned me that if I accepted any prescription from the doctor, it would cost the company $8,000. Then he had the nerve to suggest that I should just go home and take some Advil for a few days instead of getting proper medical attention. When I told him I could barely walk and needed medical attention, he tried to guilt-trip me. He went on about how the company had been good to me and how they were trying to keep costs down. I couldn't help but point out the irony of him preaching about costs while he was on his third vacation that month, leaving us to work with inadequate safety equipment. He got defensive, claiming he worked hard managing the company. When I sarcastically asked if he meant managing from the golf course, he changed his tone. He tried to make it sound like he was doing me a favor, suggesting we could just forget the whole incident happened if I went home and took some over-the-counter pain medication. I ended the call right there and turned my phone off. The nerve of this guy. I went ahead with the examination, and guess what? The doctor said I had a severe muscle strain that could have been much worse. She prescribed proper pain medication and physical therapy, saying if it wasn't treated properly, it could lead to chronic issues. Instead of responding to my boss's calls, I documented everything. I kept all his texts where he tried to convince me not to file a workers' compensation claim. I also reached out to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration and reported the safety violations at our worksite. 2 weeks later, my boss came back from his vacation to find not only a workers' compensation claim, but also a surprise inspection from OSHA. They found multiple safety violations, and the company was hit with hefty fines. The company's insurance provider also launched their own investigation after I reported my boss's attempt to discourage me from seeking medical treatment. Turns out this wasn't the first time he'd tried to avoid workers' compensation claims by pressuring employees. The insurance company threatened to drop their coverage unless the company made major changes. The board of directors, including his own family members, forced him to step down from his position. They appointed a new manager who actually took workplace safety seriously. I completed my physical therapy, returned to work, and got promoted to safety coordinator. Now I make sure no other worker has to choose between their health and their job. After my accident at work last year that left me with a permanent back injury, my husband and I decided we needed to downsize. The medical bills were piling up and I could no longer work full-time at the hospital where I'd been a nurse for 8 years. We found this modest apartment that seemed perfect, affordable, close to my husband's workplace, and in what appeared to be a quiet neighborhood. The first month was peaceful. My 2-year-old son adjusted well to his new room and I was finally getting into a routine of managing my chronic pain while taking care of him during the day. Then they moved in upstairs. It started with occasional loud music. Then came the constant gatherings on the stairwell right behind my bedroom. A group of young adults who apparently had nothing better to do than smoke, laugh loudly, and treat the building like their personal playground. The worst was the guy living above us, who seemed to fancy himself the next big rapper, practicing at all hours over blasting beats. I tried being reasonable. I really did. I approached them politely, explaining about my young child trying to sleep and mentioning my disability, asking if they could please keep the noise down. The guy from upstairs just brushed me off with a half-hearted promise to try, which they never did. I called the building management. They said they'd look into it. Nothing changed. I called noise patrol multiple times. Each visit went the same way. The officers would show up and inform them about the noise complaints. The group would always defend themselves, claiming they were just hanging out and weren't being that loud. The officers would ask them to keep it down and that was it. They'd quiet down for maybe 30 minutes after the officers left, then go right back to their usual volume. Tonight was different. My husband was working late and my son had been struggling to fall asleep through their latest concert. I'd already gone up once, politely asking them to respect quiet hours. One of them rudely told me to mind my own business. That was it. Something in me snapped. I remembered what my son's pediatrician said about how white noise can help babies sleep through disruptions. Well, they were about to learn about disruptions. I pulled up Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses on my TV's music app. My son loves this song. We play it during his wild dance time in the afternoons. I cranked the volume to 100. Even at 20, it has enough bass to vibrate the windows. Despite having misophonia that makes certain sounds unbearable, I was so angry that the loud music didn't bother me one bit. I started screaming along with Axl Rose at the top of my lungs, knowing full well that I sound like a cat being strangled. The vibrations from my TV made their drinks rattle on the stairwell. I could hear them shouting over my music, confused about what was happening and where the sound was coming from. I kept going, screeching every word until the song ended. Then I shut everything off. The silence that followed was beautiful. I heard one of them express their bewilderment about what had just happened. Then, miracle of miracles, they turned their music off. I heard them gathering their things and shuffling upstairs, muttering among themselves. The next morning I ran into the wannabe rapper in the hallway. He tried to bring up the previous night, but before he could say much, I cut him off. I apologized sweetly for any disturbance, explaining how much I love that song. Then I casually mentioned having quite a playlist, including Baby Shark, my son's favorite song, that he could listen to for hours on repeat. He quickly backtracked, apologizing for their previous noise, clearly wanting no part of my musical threats. It's been 2 weeks now. They still hang out on the stairwell sometimes, but as soon as they start getting loud, I just need to open my window and start humming the first few notes of Baby Shark. Works like a charm. My son slept through the whole thing that night. Turns out he's developed his father's ability to sleep through anything, and I've never slept better, knowing I've finally found the perfect volume for peaceful negotiations. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.